Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with provisions of this Act, the Belvidere Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted with the Star Ledger and Express Times, and submitted to the town clerk of the town of Belvidere on May 13th, 2020. Due to the public health emergency in the state of New Jersey, as declared in Executive Order 103, the board will be holding this meeting virtually and suspending some of its normal meeting procedures this evening. Specifically, board members will be participating in the meeting virtually via Zoom. In addition, the virtual meeting will only be live streamed for members of the public. Directions for accessing the live stream were posted on the district website, www.belvideresd.org. We very much welcome input from the public. Because this meeting is only being live streamed, public comment will be handled as follows. The public can email comments to be read during public participation to rtjalma@belvideresd.org by 8 p.m. Do the resolution first. A motion was made by... Can I get a motion and a second?
Motion. Second.
Second.
Who was the second?
Me. Danielle.
We're going to suspend certain meeting procedures as described in the notice of meeting, specifically to authorize board members to participate, blah, blah, blah. So the motion passed. So we need to do the flag salute. Chris, where's the flag?
How's that? It's the best I can do, I think.
All right. I guess we stand. I pledge allegiance
To
to
the
the
flag
flag of the United
United
States
States
of
of
America,
America,
To the republic,
to the republic, which
for
it
which it
stands,
stands,
one nation,
nation,
under God, indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty,
liberty, and
and
justice
justice.
for all.
Okay, Shelley, you'll do roll call?
Mrs. Stefan?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Lucas?
Yes.
Mr. Labar?
Here.
Mrs. Duckworth?
Here.
Mrs. Williams?
Here.
Mrs. Williams is here?
Yep, I just saw her face.
Oh, good. Mr. Blum? Mrs. Scott?
Here.
Dr. Zuppeth? Doc? You're here? Mrs. Pell?
Here.
Mrs. Costantino?
Here.
And Mrs. Spokino?
All right, so those are the only papers I have. So I guess at this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Kathy from School Boards, who's going to do our ethics training for tonight. This is the only item on the agenda.
Wow, thank you.
I did not receive any public participation emails.
Oh, good thing you said that, Shelley, I forgot.
Not any here.
Okay. Thank you so much, President Stephen, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me, Belvidere. I hope you're all well and ready for a real fun-filled ethics training. I know these Zoom meetings can be rather exhausting. I don't know what it is about, sitting in front of a computer that's a little bit or sometimes a lot more tiring than presenting in person or receiving training in person, which is what I personally like to do. So I do applaud your desire to just kind of unpack the Ethics Act, because it should be, a word like ethics should be black and white, but it is not. It's a school board service. However, the Code of Ethics is a law that we need to abide by, and if we don't, there can be some very serious consequences to such. So we want to keep your service as clean as possible, and so that all of your passions and your desires for the best educational experience for your students and for all of your stakeholders who are involved in the district is actualized through high-quality board service that, you know, stays within, it's swim lane is probably the best way to put it. I typically have a slideshow presentation, which I'm happy to go through with you. It's something that I do in all of my districts and in all of the districts throughout the state. But before we get started, I'm just kind of wondering if anybody has any questions that come to mind as the Ethics Act goes. Anything that you've encountered that you're like, I'd like to know a little bit more about that? Anything at the outset that you wonder about? Okay. Now I have here that if the host would let me share my stuff, I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
Is that you, Chris? Are you the?
Yep. Yeah, you should be able to do it now, Kathy.
All right, fabulous. Now, hang on a second. Now, did you, were you able to, I believe I sent you the presentation in advance? Did you see that?
I got it out this morning, yes.
Okay, fabulous. So everyone is familiar with it, or did everyone have a chance to review it? Great, so we can just do kind of highlights. That's awesome. All right, let me get to ethics for school officials here. And honestly, I think the best way to learn from these presentations is to ask questions. So please stop me from talking. I'm getting tired of hearing my voice speak, talk all the time. I'm not interested, you are. So do feel free to interrupt me and ask questions. This is kind of important stuff. Mentioning the fact that this is a law, right? And not only is it about making sure that your conduct is not in violation of the public trust, you also have to go a step further as a school board member to make sure that the behavior that you exhibit both at and away from the dais does not create, look at those last two red words on that slide, a justifiable impression that such trust is being violated. And what that means is that even if you are pretty much convinced and you know that you are violating the code of ethics, your intentions are good and they truly are. If you create the justifiable impression that you are in violation of the Ethics Act, if a reasonable person would think that you're acting in violation of the Ethics Act, even if technically you are not, according to the School Ethics Act itself, you are in violation of the act. So Chris, thanks for bringing me on board, because it's that important to understand what the Code of Ethics says, what the Ethics Act says, and what it does not. And it's applicable to all board members, charter and public school, or traditional public school. And, it also affects your district's CUSAC scores. If a board member is found in violation of the Ethics Act, then your whole board loses 8 points on CUSAC. And for, all the work that goes into a CUSAC score and all the work that your teachers, your admins, your staff, everyone is doing to ensure that the district measures up to Trenton standards, what a shame for 8 points to be dissipated by the action of one board member. And it's not just that your CUSAC takes a hit. Credibility takes a hit, and the entire board's credibility takes a hit. And that's a lot more important, if you am I saying, than the 8 points on the CUSAC, which, trust me, are trust being violated and a bad reputation for the board is something that doesn't go away at the end of the calendar year. The Ethics Act itself, if you're to read it from top to bottom, established all of these things, like what the commission is going to look like that judges you on this, a code of ethical behavior, conflicts of interest, what they look like. You have to fill out your disclosure statements that come from Trenton. You have to do your training requirement. And this slide here, which you can save as part of your reference material, is very handy. It delineates what kind of training you need to take when. New Jersey School Boards Association provides it for you free. Currently, we're doing all of this online. But even when the pandemic goes away and we're allowed to, congregate in gatherings of any size, our online training is available to you throughout the year. We do in-person trainings when we're permitted. So, we've had to cancel a few of them, but the online training is very good, and it takes you through what you need to know. That being said, if you register for online and then the in-person becomes available later in the year, take the in-person if you can. There's really no substitute for being able to ask questions of your presenters and JSBA attorneys. The Ethics Commission is packed. It's a 9-member body, real quickly, that meets in Trenton. The governor appoints the members. They're not paid for what they do, but they do very important work because they issue advisory opinions for school board members and they hear ethics complaints. And, you know, I'm wondering if anybody, you know, could articulate what they think the difference might be between an advisory opinion and an ethics complaint. Does anyone have thoughts on that they'd like to share? All right, advisory opinions are behavior that's about to happen or you're thinking about doing, and ethics complaints is what's already passed. So what do I mean by that? Well, if a board member is confused as to whether or not they may be conflicted, they're not 100% sure. If the board, let's say if a board member wants to be on an interview committee and is not sure if that would be in line with the Ethics Act or a whole bunch of other things. They haven't done that yet, but they're thinking about doing it. All you have to do is go on the Ethics Commission's website. It's part of the DOE's website. Get the address, write them a letter, send them an email. I think now you do it electronically. And the next time they meet, they'll consider your request and give you advice on whether or not you're conflicted, or you can be on that interview committee, or you can drive that bus, or whatever it is. And it's never punitive, right? Then once they give you the advice, they're going to figure that you're going to follow it. And you can only ask for that about yourself or someone who is on your board, right? On the Belvidere Board of Ed. You can't ask about Hope. You can't ask about Cedar Grove. You can't ask about High Point. Only Belvidere. Ethics complaints are a completely different matter because that's when the horse has left the barn already and you've made somebody really mad. Anyone can file an ethics complaint against you. Could be a fellow board member, could be an administrator in your district, could be a staff member in your district, could be a stakeholder, you know, property owner, parent, senior, or it could be someone who's just a good governance watchdog and it has nothing to do with your district. And you're subject to ethics complaints. That's a really ugly process. And if you are found in violation of the Code of Ethics, there is a penalty involved. And it can be as mild as a reprimand, which is just a non-friendly letter from the Commissioner of Education telling you that you've done something wrong and please don't do it again, all the way up to a removal, where the commission can suggest that you be removed from, or recommend that you be removed from the board because your behavior was so egregiously violative of the Ethics Act, and the commissioner affirms it, and there you go. In fact, a decision was just handed down this month that recommended removal of a Patterson Board of Ed member. So, you know, they're not kidding. In between reprimand and removal are censure, which is a little bit rougher than the reprimand because the board president has to read the letter from the dais. And a suspension, you're off the board for a particular amount of time. Length is recommended by the SEC and the commissioner decides if that's okay or not. And I'm seeing, interestingly enough, more suspensions. I started with the association in 2016, and for whatever reason, the Ethics Commission is ratcheting up its issuance of suspensions. They're not common, but they're out there. They're becoming more and more frequent, and I'm just kind of wondering if this is a trend among, you know, board members and also among the SEC trying to, you know, really flex the muscle that the law gives them. Any questions about any of these particular penalties before we move on? Or the difference between an advisory opinion and an ethics complaint? All right. Well, if you went through this, you probably realize that the next set of slides are all going to go through the Code of Ethics, right? So subsection A through subsection J. And I don't know if I have to read all of them to you because I did want to leave some time for discussion. But what I am going to urge you to do is, and it's all in here, right? Everything that you need to abide by as a school board member, right? But if you, and with your indulgence, Chris, I'm gonna share something else.
Mhm.
Let's see here. Do I have my little red and black ethics commission thing? So I sent with a I'm not sure if you can actually see this though, a code of ethics do's and don'ts. Is that visible to you? I'm not quite sure if I'm getting that. I would advise you to look at that. It's not coming up on my computer, so we'll just kind of move along. But basically, now what are you all seeing? Are you seeing the slideshow again or no?
Slideshow.
So, yeah, slideshow.
Okay, and you're on slide, the one that says A, am I correct about that?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, let me just kind of get out of this thing here, okay. All right, so basically subsection A, anything that, is passed by the legislature, any kind of advice the Ethics Commission promulgates, anything in the School Ethics Act, anything the courts tell you to do, you have to do, okay? That's pretty simple. But it starts getting a little more complicated as we go along. This one sounds easy, okay? I will make decisions in terms of the educational welfare of children, right? Of course, that's why you're on the board. And seek to develop and maintain public schools that meet the individual needs of all children. Okay, that sounds good, but you really have to consider that three-letter word all very seriously. And that, of course, is regardless of their ability or race or creed or social standing. That small word all encompasses just that, all kids in your district, not just your kids, not your neighbor's kids or your niece and nephew, not just the gifted and talented kids, not just the special education kids. When you cast a vote, you need to ensure that you are making your decision, that you are casting your vote, because the way you vote on that resolution or that policy, yes or no, up or down, will, and you can demonstrate your feelings on this, will benefit all children, will serve all children, not just the ones that are in your family or in your neighborhood or who are, familiar to you. Or it's as simple and as complex as that. That one actually happens to be my favorite part of the Code of Ethics. And moving on, subsection C is pretty much a job description. I mean, as board members, as passionate as we are about our districts and as much as we want for our kids and as many articles as we read, and maybe we are professional educators in our other lives, before we step up towards the dais, all that we are to do as board members, and it is a lot, and it is a privilege, and this is what we are elected to do, is policy making, planning, and appraisal of our policies and our plans, right? That's what we do as board members. And we frame our policies and our plans after consulting those who will be affected by them. That's what public comment is all about, right? That's why you have public comment before you vote on motions. That's why you have first and second readings of your policies. But this is the heart of what it means to be a board member, right? Those who are going outside the lines of subsection C, and you'll notice the fine print in all of the slides, are in this category with the small black letters. If board action was taken to effectuate policy and plans without consulting those affected, et cetera, then you're in violation of the School Ethics Act. Now, does this mean that you have to consult everybody, that you've got to knock on doors before you pass your dress code policy? No, but you have to have the ability for those who will be affected by it to give you their opinion. And then you exercise your own independent judgment and you listen to your administration and their recommendations and the conversation around the dais about particular agenda items, and you cast your vote. And that's that. Because all of your action, all of your authority happens at the board table. When you step away from the board table and you're not voting on any agenda items, and you're not talking about policy or planning or appraisal, and taking action on policy, planning, and appraisal, then you're just a regular community member. The people who shop with you at the supermarket, the people who are standing next to you in church, they have the exact same authority as you, unless you're at the dais. The board member has no authority except when they are at a board meeting. And that's kind of where it kind of goes right into subsection D as well. And this thing is actually one of my favorites, although a lot of people get in trouble on subsection D, because it is our responsibility together with my fellow board members. That's a real important phrase, okay? So it's not all on you, and it's not supposed to be all on you, to ensure that the schools are well run, but not to run the schools, right? So I'll read that again, because I was chopped up. I will carry out my responsibility not to administer the schools, but together with my fellow board members to see that they are well run. So for this reason, we don't talk to staff members other than the superintendent. We don't go into a parent-teacher conference and say, you know, I am seated on the board, and I want you to know that. You don't go to church and say, well, you know, I am on the board, and this is what we are planning to do. No, not at all. And you certainly don't go into the classroom and ask the teacher, well, how are things going with the next generation science standards? Could you show me how you are teaching the children? Could you show me your lesson plan? Anything like that. That is not your purview at all. And that's actually the good news about being a board member, because you've hired someone to do that for you. You've hired someone with an extensive background in education, right? Someone who went through a superintendent search either with you when you were on the board or preceding you, but you have someone in place to make the right decisions. The board articulates the vision, and the superintendent and administration makes sure that that happens. So I'm wondering if there's any questions about that, because I did do a lot of talking and I'm not sure how absorbable that was or interesting. Any questions on subsection D or anything before that? From anyone? Okay, I hope I did make myself clear. That's a really important one. And I think the reason why that gets violated a lot is because board members feel great passion for their district. And we want to be able to fix everything. And the fact of the matter is that we can't. You know, there are actually superintendents who serve on boards of education in their own hometowns. And it's the same thing for them as it would be for Kathy Hellowes sitting on a board, as it would be for any other board member sitting on a board. It's just not their job to be the superintendent. It's their job to be the board member and to act in concert with the board. And that works really easily into section E, which is that, you know, authority rests with the full Board of Education, not with the individual. So we don't go around making personal promises or taking any kind of actions that would compromise the board. And I would also say, and excuse me for sounding so negative, but I tell my districts this all the time, you also don't make personal threats, right? You know, as a parent, I may be very unhappy with the way the field trip was run. I might think it was a complete and utter disaster, but just because I sit on the board doesn't mean that I have any kind of way or authority to rectify that, right? I need to go by the chain of command just like everyone else. And the other thing too is, while I'm going through that chain of command, I really better not be putting out there that I'm Kathy Hellwood from Warren Township Board of Education, or I'm the Board of Education, because that's really asking for an ethics violation. Again, anyone can file an ethics complaint about you. And, you know, a staff member could too, or someone who hears about it. You know, these are things that we really do need to abide by to, again, ensure trust in the board's work. Put confidence in you as a board member. Stay in your swim lane, you know? And F is pretty easy. I don't think I have to waste an awful lot of time on that. You use your own independent judgment, right? But I also just want to note that as part of that, you know, to just make sure that we're safeguarding the fact that board members are using their individual judgment, If you are running for election or reelection to the Board of Ed, and you receive the endorsement of the teachers union, the SEC has deemed in an advisory opinion that you need to sit out negotiations for a year, okay, after your election, if you have received the endorsement of the teachers union. Okay, any questions on any of these?
Yeah, I do. Ms. Hill, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes. Brian?
It's Brian Smith. Can you go back to D? D is in
Absolutely.
Donald.
Yep, D, here we go. Run the school, not to run the schools, but to see that they are well run. Absolutely.
In my experience, that's one of the harder ones to comply with or police, because some board members, and I've been on the board for 20 years, closely question the administration about how the district is run, and it can get pretty granular. Personally, I've never thought that that was unethical, but I do see a distinction between, say, authorizing the hiring of an administrator, but then telling the superintendent how the hours of that administrator should be spent delivering educational services. Now, if you agree that that is micromanaging, do you agree or not that that's unethical as opposed to just bad practice for a board member to get into something like that? I don't find it unethical, but I still think D can be dangerous.
Well, I'm so glad you put that in front of the group, because it's interesting. It doesn't really, to be direct, and please excuse me, it almost doesn't matter what you and I think is ethical. What matters is what the ethics commission thinks is ethical, right?
Kathy, can I interrupt you just for 1 second?
No,
I work
yeah,
for a state agency, and I'm the ethics liaison officer. So what you just told me is what I told my agency at their last monthly meeting, because we had ethics issues, and my memo said, it's not what you think, it's what the public thinks. You could think of yourself as being the most ethical person and have friends that don't question your judgment, but that's irrelevant. So thanks for that reminder. But I guess the question still is, where do you draw the line between a school board member closely questioning, almost at a granular level, how the budget is being prepared, what the numbers mean, and violating or not violating D as an ethical matter?
Okay. Well, I think I probably can't speak to every, every particular circumstance. In fact, I certainly can't. I know you're not asking me to do that. But if you go back to our job description here, right? C, it's policy making, planning, and appraisal. If you go to the governance 2 training as well, we really get into, that's where it's a board member's role in finance, where we really delineate what the duties of a board member are. So it's not the board member's duty to write the budget. And you know something, Brian, that's a good thing, because if it were, then a lot of lay people would be disqualified from serving on boards. They would not have that kind of expertise. That's not the way the system is set up. It's set up, and it works so well because community members who have all different types of professional experiences and expertise can serve together on a board of ed, whether or not they have experience in as educational professionals, whether or not they have experiences in accounting and budgeting, right? So we rely on our professionals to do that for us and to make sure that what they're doing is matching our collective vision. So rather than going through the budget line by line and saying, well, can we cut 20% from our paper? Can we do this? Can we can we jigger this or that? That's what board members need to do, is to take the 30,000 foot view rather than the 30-foot view. And say, how is this matching our vision, right? It sounds, I don't know how that sounds to everyone who hears me say that. I think it sounds a little fluffy to some people. But You're not on the board to write budgets. You're on the board to make sure that the district is spending responsibly while advancing the board's vision for high student achievement. And and you know what? You ask your administrators how that budget is doing exactly that. And there may be some hard questions involved there, but it's probably not, how much money are we spending on rock salt? I don't think I have an exact formula to plug in for you as far as when it concerns the budget, but does that seem to make sense or clear anything up at all?
It does for me. Thanks for that answer.
No, I'm glad. No, I'm happy to do it. And I also want to just kind of mention a very interesting case that came down this year. Just to touch on a point that you made, it's what the public thinks, right, about our ethical behavior or our non-ethical behavior. There's a board member in Jersey City who was absolutely convinced that his board was doing the wrong thing. Absolutely 100%. And you know what? I got to be honest with you. He had some good points. But instead of bringing that to the dais and trying to correct the behavior amongst the board members, I believe he filed suit against the board, right? Or he did something where he usurped his boundaries. He was just trying to get this fixed. I think he went to the commissioner. He's just kind of jumping all over the place. And you know what? I think if you talk to that board member, he would sincerely tell you that he was just trying to right a wrong. But he was doing it the wrong way. And he was found in violation of the Ethics Act by the SEC for his trying to correct unethical behavior, but he did it in a way that doesn't line up with the Ethics Act. So I hope that doesn't kind of muddy the waters, and I'm happy to send anybody the case who's looking for it. But I make that point because it's not necessarily, that really underscores, it's not necessarily what we're firmly convinced is right or wrong, but there's a right way to do things to make sure that what is right is being done. And I hope that makes some kind of a sense to all of you. But if not, also, I just want to put out there that you're welcome to call me later if any questions on these pop up. Any questions other than Brian's at this point?
I just wanted to add on to Brian's, and I totally understand, micromanaging and drawing a line, but I just think the one part of D that says to see that they are well run, that we're all working together to do that, I can see how it can sometimes look like it's micromanaging, but what I think it is too, though, is that we need to work together to do that, to see that that is well running. So I think that sometimes, because this is kind of scary, you don't want to, cross lines, that boards in general sometimes are just very, very quiet. Maybe they appear at the meeting, they vote, and there's no feedback, no response. And I just don't see the point of being a board member if you're not going to have some kind of input. So while I understand, and I, of course, am not going to look to, violate any ethics codes, but I do hope that we're all on the same page to make change together or make sure the schools are well run together. And I think that that's where that last line gets that's objective.
You know what? I think you're making a great point, because what does that mean? To see that they are well run, but not to run them, right? So I think that the key phrase is that 30,000 foot view, right? If you're starting to question about, the order in which the kids receive their lunch versus recess, or, how the lesson plans are working, or whether or not the class trip is going to be, a full day or half of a day to a particular, that's administration. That's not speaking to your educational vision. And that is starting to get into the weeds. Now, as board members, You know, when I was sitting on the board, I had my kids in the school, you know, young girls, and I cared very much about those things, right? I cared about whether or not they had time to eat their lunch. I cared about whether or not they were spending, you know, too much time on the bus going from one field trip to another. All of those kinds of things that parents care about. But that's not something that I could bring to the dais and discuss because that's too micro, right? That's too granular. But what I could discuss with my board members is why we were enacting a particular policy, right? Our nutrition policy. You know, should we allow for, allergens to come into the schools? That's policy. That's something that, yeah, you bring to the dais and yeah, you really ought to have robust discussion about. That's a big deal. That being said, a lot of times policies are mandated, the changes that you have to make, so they're really, it kind of truncates conversation, absolutely. And sometimes, when you get your agenda, if you look, that's really the heart of what you do.
Mhm.
Agenda is what you do. You don't do anything outside of the agenda. No matter what's going on, you know, here's the thing, if you don't mind me saying, and kind of going off script a little bit, graduations are coming up, right? The whole state is talking about graduations. How are our kids going to graduate from high school? It's a poor class, it's been through so much, they've waited for 12 plus years to do this. How can we make things right by them, blah, 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 right? I get that, I completely understand. And each district that has a high school graduating class is going to have to figure out a way to send them off, you know, in a way that honors all of the hard work that they put in. But you know what? That is not a board decision. That is an administrative decision. It doesn't belong to the Board of Ed. We have very strong feelings, I'm sure, as board members. And that's admirable. We care about our kids and we care about our schools. But that's not on your agenda. That's not part of your policy manual. That's not part of your long-term plans. That's not even part of your annual goals, right? So it's not, and it's not appraisal either. The appraisal is appraising your superintendent's performance.
Right.
And the performance of your long-range facilities plan, and the performance of last year's budgets. How did that go? But it's not the kind of day-to-day things, even when they are as important and as headline generating and as passion invoking as graduation, right? We all have an opinion, but it's not our swim lane. Does that make sense? Does that kind of help?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'm sure it's not an ethics violation to do nothing. But I'm not really sure if there's a member, and I'm not saying it's anybody in this group, but if there's a board member who doesn't ever speak, literally just comes to meetings, doesn't speak in any committees, doesn't speak at the board level, and the only thing they do is vote yes or no. I just feel that sometimes our homework has to be done a little bit, and I don't know that, I'm sure that's not an ethics violation, but I'm not really sure what we're all trying to do here if we're not trying to work together.
No, you're absolutely right. It's not, as frustrating as it is, that's not an ethics violation.
Right.
Now,
I'm sure it's not, but.
Yeah, it's not. And you can't, and you know what else? What else is not an ethics violation? If that person or any board member keeps going to meetings and abstains on every vote. That's not an ethics violation either. That's ridiculous. I don't know why you're there.
Right, I don't know that either.
Yeah, but oddly enough, there are people who do that. Or people who abstain on tough votes. That's more common. And it's not an ethics violation. But a couple of considerations. Number one, with someone who doesn't participate in the discussion, you know, I would probably want to talk to that person myself as a fellow board member. Like, do you, what do you think about this? What do you think about the, try to engage them in discussion about particular agenda items. If I have a question about an agenda item, I will ask the superintendent before I go to vote for any kind of information that I need to make that vote. And it could very well be that that person who's not participatory at the dais but does cast a vote is doing that kind of work. And if they're doing that kind of work and they're doing that kind of homework and reading their board packet and they know what they're voting on and can articulate them if they're asked about it, then that's fine. Then that's pretty good. But you know who's kind of losing out, and it's not an ethics violation, is their constituents. Know where their values really are at as fully as they would if there was some kind of a discussion there. So, you know, what are they doing? They're really kind of putting their reelection at risk if they are thinking about running for reelection. They're not in violation of the Ethics Act. You're absolutely right. Working as a team is really important, and communication is you can't work as a team without communication. And I don't mean to imply that every single agenda item you should have a discussion about, oh my God, I wanna, you know, I wanna shoot myself in the head. That's not exactly visionary either. But the important stuff, you're always gonna have something at some point that you need to decide on that needs a conversation with the board. So don't get away from that. You know. And, you know, there's all different levels of experience on a Board of Education. Someone who's been around for an awfully long time, maybe has seen stuff like this before and can help you navigate through whatever, you know, agenda items you're looking at or decisions that you have to make. You know, rely on each other. Honestly, I mean, it's sounds corny, but it's a team sport, you know? Any other questions? Obviously, I'd love. I'm sorry if I'm a little wordy, but I don't have to spend much time on. If anything, you need to keep the confidential things confidential, right? Anything that that goes on in exec, anything that has to do with a staff member or a kid, it's got to be kept confidential. If you don't, the Ethics Commission will come down hard on you. I'm seeing it more and more, and also you will damage somebody outside of the code of ethics. This is the stuff that's personally damaging. As far as H goes, don't need to spend much time on that, because you can only hire personnel with the recommendation of your superintendent. You can't just kind of say, oh, my neighbor's daughter would be perfect for this job, so I'm going to reject the name on the agenda and make a motion to appoint Kathy Hellowa. That's not going to fly. And also the chain of command is extremely important because it keeps you in line with to support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties, and also to refer all complaints to the superintendent. And only with the board, and the board will only act on complaints after the failure of an administrative solution. So if no administrative solution is forthcoming, you know, then you may be, you know, then you're the last stop on the chain of command, but I want to say 98% or higher, and I work with a lot of boards of complaints from parents or staff or stakeholders are solved before they ever get to the Board of Education. Any questions on those subsections at all? Okay, because I know we're there, because I know we're kind of running towards the 15-minute mark here. In 2019, there were some interesting decisions that came down. The commissioner affirms the SEC's decisions, and the commissioner affirms all of these. That confidentiality thing, there was a member, kind of a new member on a board who was well behaved, except that he sent an interesting email to his family members, and they put it out on social media, and were, you know, it was all about a student. It wasn't cool. So that person received a censure. Someone who went to a subordinate member, or rather a subordinate employee of the superintendent and kind of offered them a job is obviously in violation of the Ethics Act, but I will tell you, approaching a subordinate employee of the superintendent as a board member is in violation of the Ethics Act. That's where that E came in. You know, and all these other bad behaviors. Someone who goes to the union and says, you know, we're trying to get rid of the superintendent is actually wound up getting a 60-day suspension. And if you were watching the news last year, you may remember this story about the board member was speeding, was stopped by the police, and in order to get out of a speeding ticket, kept saying that she was a member of the Board of Education, She put a few salty words in there, and at the end of the day, she was suspended 30 days from her job as a board member, which is, and she wasn't happy about that, but at least she didn't curse about that. She probably did, but not in writing, at least. And this one is interesting. So if you, as a board member, are not following visitation procedures that are in place for everyone else, everyone in the community, in violation of the Ethics Act. This gentleman didn't realized that, or at least didn't want to pay attention to that, because his wife was a teacher in the school, and his auto body shop was down the street. So he walked in whenever he wanted to. That is a violation of the Ethics Act. Also, probably a little more obvious to be a violation is meeting with the school secretary and asking the school secretary to go public with the idea that the secretary is being blackmailed by the superintendent is just a really bad idea. And because this person wasn't elected, they lost their election, imagine that, the SEC could only offer a censure. However, if that person was a board member by the time this decision was made, they would have been in violation of B and D and E and I and J. So, you know, it was that was a bad one. All of these cases are on the Ethics Commission website, and it makes for fascinating and horrifying, and every once in a while, so I would absolutely recommend you become familiar with these things. You'll be a better board member, and there's some real entertainment value in it too. It does get a little bit depressing though, I will tell you this. I can't imagine what it's like to be on that ethics commission. All you do is like listen to bad board member behavior every meeting on and off. So God bless them. But also another thing that the SEC helps us with is to ensure that we don't compromise our public's trust by participating in votes or discussion that we really should be conflicted from. The Ethics Act spells all that out, and some of those examples are here on the slide. They're pretty obvious. What I want you to think about too, and to realize, is that you do need to know the definition of immediate family and relative, because that has a bearing on whether or not you are conflicted from a particular vote or discussion. So in Goldenrod there, you'll see that an immediate family member is either one or the other, a spouse or a dependent child who lives with you, okay? That's it. If your mom lives with you, believe it or not, the SEC does not think she is a member of your immediate family, all right? It's only your spouse or dependent child. They're very black and white on that. However, your mom is a relative, right? Well, in fact, all of these people are your relatives. Your stepbrother is your relative. Your half-sister is your relative. Your civil union or domestic partner is your relative. Your grandparent, your niece, your nephew, all these people. Interestingly enough, cousin is not on here, okay? But all these other parties are, whether they are related to you or your spouse or domestic partner, okay, by blood, adoption, or marriage. So your husband's siblings are your relatives. Your wife's aunt is your relative, okay? And the reason why I'm making a big deal about this is because knowing where these people, if they work in education, will keep your nose clean when it comes to hiring issues and collective bargaining issues, right? So if you have a relative who is looking for a job in a school district, they can't be hired in Belvidere unless the executive county superintendent grants a waiver. Those are very few or far between. So you can't hire a relative of yourself, that big definition, or a fellow board member or your superintendent. But you can be elected to the board, of course, if one of your relatives is already working in the district. And if that happens, that's okay, but you can't take part in any of the discussions that are delineated here. Nothing to do with the superintendent's performance or contract. Anything involving the chain of command between the relative and the superintendent, you're out of those discussions. And you can't take part in the search for a new superintendent. You can't even help write the advertisement or decide what search firm are going to help you if you have a relative or someone belonging to you who works in the district. Now, when we're talking about collective bargaining, that becomes more detailed, and a lot of this is fact specific. So our best advice is to always, if you think there's a conflict, ask your board attorney about it. But this handy little chart was actually written by and promulgated by the School Ethics Commission. So this is kind of straight from the horse's mouth. And to, go over it with you a little bit, any kind of immediate family member or relative, the big definition or the small definition, if they work in Belvidere, you are not to participate in negotiations in any way. However, if an immediate family member or you yourself works, in another school district and is a member of a union, a local union in another school district, right? Let's say, Bloomfield, right? You cannot participate in negotiations until the memorandum of agreement is ratified, the salary guides, the total compensation package. Once both committees agree to it, your side and their side, you can vote on the final passage of that. If you have that large relative definition who works in another district and who is also unionized, so if your niece happens to work in Cape May, that's okay. You're in negotiations from start to finish. Noticing that green asterisk there, absent another conflict. So just talk to your niece and make sure that she's not on the union's negotiations committee or serving as vice president or something of the union, local union, because that would be deemed heightened union involvement and that may conflict you. Or, if the terms of your relative's employment is linked to the unit that you are negotiating for, that your board is negotiating with, then you're probably conflicted as well. But these things get a little complicated, so ask your attorney. I mentioned earlier that if the union endorses you formally, that you're out of negotiations for a year, and that is true. But look up at decision A1018, because that's very interesting. That's when the union tried to endorse someone who didn't want it in order to keep them out of negotiations. Very interesting opinion. The union did not prevail. Chris, do you have to invoke the doctrine of necessity ever? I don't think so in Belvidere.
No, we're usually good. We have very few conflicted members.
Excellent. We're skipping over that. I'm going to skip over this knowledge check. You can do it yourselves. Interview committees, do you use those, Chris? Do you have board members sit on interview committees ever?
Only for administrative positions.
Okay, which you can do. The superintendent directs the hiring process, but you have to abide by these very narrow definitions that are detailed in these ethics advisory opinions. So Chris could not have the entire board on the negotiations committee, or really any more than one or two. Exit interviews, however, seemed like a good idea to a board member who asked for an advisory opinion. Could we participate in exit interviews for our teachers who are leaving the district? And the answer from the ethics commission was a resounding no. That is in violation of D. That's getting into the minutia, and that's not where a board member should be. And that kind of wraps up everything that I wanted to say to you as part of our presentation. I do have some points to consider. Chief among them is to read your school board notes and to, because if there's any kind of updates that need to know about, any cases that were decided in the court or by the ethics commission, they'll be there, and you can use that advice. And that being said, are there any other questions that I could answer for you in the 4 minutes that are left to us?
Ms. Helwa?
Yes.
It's Brian Smith again. Has the issue of whether a mother-in-law is a relative been litigated as an ethical matter? This actually has come up with our board in the past, but and we got conflicting opinions. So what do you know about that?
Well, I'll go to slide 24, and I don't know if it's been litigated in the courts, but if you see here who qualifies as a relative, you'll see a parent is on there, assuming the parent doesn't live with you, right? And if you go down here, it says whether related to the school official or spouse by blood, marriage, or adoption. So my husband's mother, is my relative and cannot look for a job in the school district where I sit on the board. And if she works in the school district, according to how I'm reading the Ethics Act, if she is working in the school district, then I need to step away from the superintendent's evaluation or determining whether or not he's met his merit goals or what kind of contract we want to offer him. Now,
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome, but rely on the advice of your school attorney. We always say it at NJSB, and we absolutely do. Thanks though, Brian, I'm glad you
Understood.
asked. Thank you. Anything else, friends? Okay. Board President
Before we-
Stephen- Oh, I'm sorry,
Know about
somebody?
the acknowledgement form, to have everybody sign that and get it back to me,
Sign it
Yes,
and scan it back, Shel?
that would be fine.
Okay,
Everybody could do that.
okay.
all right.
Thanks, Kathy, for coming out, we appreciate it.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, Kat. Thanks a lot. We only have 2 minutes left, but thank you very much for spending the hour tonight taking your time to do this for us.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me, and any questions, just give me a jingle, okay?
Great, thanks.
Thanks, have a great night, stay safe, everybody.
Thanks, Kathy.
You too.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, do you have anything you want to say before I do a motion to adjourn?
No, we'll just wait until Wednesday, we're meeting in 2 nights to go over a few things then, but, yeah, so we'll wait till Wednesday.
Okay, before we get cut out of the video, can I get a motion and a second to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
Second? Did somebody second?
Second.
All right, meeting adjourned. I don't have my gavel to bang. Have a nice night, everybody. Thanks
Yeah,
again.
everybody stay healthy. See you Wednesday.